I want to thank you. My office is the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation, and rather than me roll through everything that's on our website, I'll try to give you a little bit of what the highlights are and kind of some of the challenges that we face as we think about trying to address some of the challenges that we see. In many ways, the way you look at technology and innovation within the tech sector, in the manufacturing sector, and other places in the social sector, there are innovations taking place also. And when we think about the big problems in our country, when we think about the education, closing the achievement gap, addressing the high school dropout rate, making sure in healthcare, making sure that communities have access to healthcare, making sure communities know where they can go to get access to healthcare and what their rights and rules are. In energy and education, healthcare, look at all the social issues. There are innovations taking place in those sectors also. Sometimes they require technology, sometimes they require new ways of thinking and a new approach to how to solve those problems. And the aim of the office is really to look at how do we think about solving those problems and how do we look at those problems differently that we can say we can close those gaps. We can't sit another 10 years and say we can still have a high school dropout rate of 50%. Why can't we, with technology, with information, with people, why can't we solve that problem? And what is it that's keeping us from scaling those good ideas and growing them and making sure that we can do this across the country and not just isolated spots, which is what we do right now. So our office looks at this from three particular perspectives. We look at capital. How can the government deploy capital differently to look for the best ideas, not for funding the same programs that we have been funding, but ensuring that the best ideas are getting access to capital. In finance or in the venture community and other places, you might think about this as venture capital, scale capital, and other places. It doesn't happen like that in the social sector. You get a grant. You get a grant to make sure more people come through the door, but you don't get a grant, and once you can show that all those people are graduating from high school, you don't get any more money. It's like we're done 3 to 5 years, the grant capital runs out, and then you're left with not being able to scale a program that works. So we're looking at innovation funds within government that allow for scale capital and growth capital, both at the Department of Education, there is one, and then the Office of Social Innovation, there's a social innovation fund at the Corporation for National and Community Service. These funds are looking at scale capital. These funds are looking for those programs that are showing impact and really helping them grow so government can be seen as a partner, not just as a part that is funding programs that aren't having an impact across the country. Second, we look at partnerships. We know we can't do this by ourselves. Government knows it alone cannot solve the problem. And sometimes the best role for government can be convening. Sometimes it can be money. Sometimes it can be setting policies right. But we're looking at what's the best way to partner so government can be a partner in solving problems as opposed to just by itself. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a partnership that was launched called Text for Baby. I don't know how many of you know about it, but this partnership is with all of the cell phone companies, with Johnson & Johnson, as well as government agencies across the board. And what we're looking at is how to get text messages to families, or especially low-income families, about what they need to do during their pregnancy. They get 3 text messages a week if they sign up for the service, which is free. And what we found, and the reason we get to text, is because we find in low-income communities, instead of using the computer, most families actually use text messaging. They don't use the computer. Only 30% actually use the internet, and 90% actually use text messaging. So trying to get to low-income communities where the problems are to solve those problems. And it is partnered with two research universities to see if we can lower maternal and child mortality rates in low-income communities throughout the United States. Idea comes from South Africa. We're also taking this idea and problem solving to see if we can take it to other countries around the world. Third, we look at civic participation, and we approach civic participation in 2 ways. One has a technology component, and the other is service itself. National service, getting people into communities, understanding what the problems in the communities are, helping serve in those communities, because when you know what's going on in those communities, you want to help make a difference. And you can't help but you can't just stand there and say, okay, well, their budgets are being cut in these communities in education, especially where there's already a high school dropout rate of 50%, and I'm going to stand and watch while that budget gets cut and those communities are continually and further falling behind. So it's when you're in those communities, service matters. It's not just about the technology, but it's actually going in there, understanding the problem, knowing the problem, and knowing that you can do something about it. If you can solve a problem in one of those communities, you can solve a problem anywhere, because those are hard circumstances, and being creative is what it's required. The second part has a technology component, which is how do we get more people connected to what's going on in communities, and how do we get communities to participate in problem solving? And that, I have to say, has been a challenge for us, because while we have worked on a technology, and here we've worked on a partnership with a nonprofit called All for Good, where they've built the technology, it sits outside, but we link to it off of the government. And the important thing about that is government sometimes doesn't need to build all the technologies, because we can't keep up with all the changes all the time. By the time we write the request for proposal and all the regulations, the technology is already outdated. But if we can figure out legally and other ways to address and meet the technology and have linked to it, then we can do more with it. So All for Good sits on serve.gov, and what we do is we link to the technology, but the tech community actually runs the technology and keeps it up to date. We're not doing that. But what we don't do very well, while that allows me to find a place where I can go serve in my community, what's also important is for us to understand at an aggregated level what's going on in communities, what's going on in neighborhoods. I know what's happening in Detroit, and I know what's happening in Chicago, but sometimes I don't know what's going on in Arkansas, Oklahoma, and other places. We need to get aggregated information from disaggregated places, and it's hard to get. A lot of anecdotal information doesn't help us make policy better. What we need is information that's coming in, showing us what's happening, and that's where I think technology can play a role and help us pinpoint where the problems are, what's going on, and what we need to do to target technologies in those spaces to make that, not just technology, target policies in those places where we know the problems are. Because one of the challenges and one of the biggest things that we have to face is we look at all constituency groups. We're not just looking at one constituency or another. We have to look across the board. And sometimes what's important in California is not necessarily always the problem in Oklahoma. And we've got to figure out how we can get enough disaggregated information that can help us make policies better in easier ways. So when we think about social innovation, think about how is it that, how can technology play a role? Because sometimes those communities that we're really targeting don't use technology. And they can't afford the technologies, they can't afford the iPhone apps because they can't afford the iPhones. But what can we do? What types of technologies can we use that allow them to address some of these problems? I'll give you a couple of organizations who I think are important to know about. One is an organization called the Family Interdependence Initiative, which is based out of California. They were able to improve the economic welfare of their community by 20%. So each family's welfare improved by 20%, their income levels, by just getting their neighborhoods together, setting a goal for each neighbor. Each person family came in and said, here's our goal. We want to improve my child's educational scores. I want to improve my income in my family. And what they did is the community came together to help each other meet their goals. And within a year, they were able to improve the outcome by 20%. So that didn't require technology, but imagine if we had technology, how can you increase the productivity and where can technology play a role? Those are the places where we're looking, because what we're trying to get to is solving those problems and really trying to make a dent in the social problems that we see across the country. Where we could use your help on is really thinking about where and what should the government be thinking about in this space so we can connect communities more effectively, but more than just connecting, really showing that problems can get solved. I'm going to end there because I believe we're going to do a Q&A, and I'm supposed to go to the couch also. So thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Sonal. Thank you. That was fantastic. I was heartened to hear you basically give a solution with the SMS messaging to the digital divide issue, which is usually the first thing that we talk about as technologists. Well, what about people without computers? However, someone with a computer across the internet said, how can social networks be used to generate enthusiasm and inspire young people to volunteer for not-profit organizations?
That's a great question, and I think I think social networking can do a lot to not only get the information about where to go, but how to volunteer. Because I have to say, a lot of the challenges that nonprofits face is if they get an influx of volunteers, they don't know what to always do with them, and they need the help to figure out where can volunteers have the greatest impact and what can they do. And I think one of the things that they could use is, one thing that's important is consistency in volunteering. Go on a regular basis, because I don't know how many of you have ever had interns, but if an intern comes once a week and maybe then doesn't come and then shows up another week, what do you do? You can't make a difference if somebody's not consistent. But if you're going to make a difference, if you want to go, be consistent. And then if you're consistent, then let's make sure that what we do with those networking sites is get people to go on a regular basis to solve targeted problems. And I think that's where we can have the greatest impact. Disasters are usually a great time to do that. And we've seen that in New Orleans. We're seeing this happening we've seen it in Nashville. But I think disasters are a good example of that. But we should be able to do the same in education.
Right, it's almost like giving blood.
Right.
It's always in a disaster situation. You think to go do it, but you really should be doing it as often as you possibly can. Do we have a question from the audience?
There's one over there.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Bala Murthy from I4 Now Solutions. Regarding the social innovation, one of the things that came through repeatedly in your observations was this subject of high school dropout. We are in our own little way trying to make some inroads into improving the dropout rate by helping with various tools and techniques, whether it's learning management solutions or other innovative ways, particularly in the urban schools. Recently there was a report, as you rightly mentioned, about greater than 50%. So our goal is to, even if we can make an impact of 1% reduction in the dropout rate, that's I think, significant accomplishment. So the question to you is, how can a smaller organization like ours partner with your programs and take a pilot or two, whether it's in the DC area or other places, and help our younger children who are going to be the pillar blocks of the 21st and 22nd century, so that we can continue to make this great country of ours a leader for the generations to come?
It's a great question. I think there's multiple ways to help. One, certainly to work with, there's several agencies in the U.S. government worth partnering with. One is the Department of Education, obviously. And the second is the Corporation for National and Community Service. It's where the president signed the bill to allow to grow from 75,000 volunteers a year to 250,000. And partnering with them, the new CEO is really focused on education and partnering with the Department of Education on this, on how to address the high school dropout rate, and certainly technology can play a huge role in that. And would love to connect you into that group already that's already working on it. And if you can run some pilots and show that it can work, what we need to figure out then is how to scale that so it can happen or replicate across the country.
I have another question here from the town hall site. How is your office using Web 2.0 tools to make fundraising for social issues more efficient?
We are, well, I think you've heard from some of our colleagues in the from the OSTP and other places already. So they're working on setting up the Web 2.0 tools for all of us across the government to use. And you'll be hearing from Alec and others and what they're using. We can't fundraise. The White House cannot fundraise, and we're not allowed to fundraise. That is not our mandate. Our mandate is to get the policies right, and we coordinate policies across the government. So it's a little bit challenging to use those tools to do that. But what we can do is we can work together with the various agencies and think about how the Web 2.0 tools can best be used for all of the grantees that the agencies have. So Department of Education, Corporation for National and Community Service, as well as kind of Department of Housing and Urban Development. So all of these have grant components, Health and Human Services, all of these have grant components, and we can certainly work together with them.
So you're building the platform.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Another question from the audience? Okay, while Megan runs with the microphone, let me just say one more. Is the administration able to adhere to standard notice and comment provisions of the Administrative Procedures Act while using social media platforms in regulatory rulemaking?
That's a question we get all the time. We're going to be testing it, and we're testing it in different places to use multimedia platforms to get comments and on rulemaking, and we're testing these. What we need to make sure is where we need to get comments from, which is across the board. We need to make sure all of those groups are accessing media and information in the same ways to do that. So we're working on it, is the best I can answer. But a large part of it is not the technology problem, it's the legal challenges. And I think working through all the legal issues has taken us actually longer than the want to use the technology. Sometimes, and it's not, some of these legal barriers were created partially because it was a time when the internet wasn't so important, and now we have to work through to what the intent of the laws are and then change the laws. So it's taken us a year to 2 years just to work on that, and we continue to work on it.
And that definitely seemed to be a thread across a number of the sessions we've heard about at the conference. One of the sessions was called Friend the Lawyers First. So before you go into this enormous project, see what the lawyers do have to say. And then maybe have to change policy before you actually attempt any of this.
Well, I would only to say, sometimes if you go straight to only to the lawyers, you'll get, the answer will generally be, no, it's not possible. Mm-hmm. I think it's usually to step back and say, what was the intent of why that law was created, and then what is possible given what is available, because it's not always that you can't do something. So for example, this technology, All for Good, when we first started working on that, we were just told it's not possible. And then it took some time to unravel what all the issues were, and as that happened, we worked through all the legal constraints and what the legal issues were to make something happen, and now we've set a precedent where others are allowed to do the same. So it takes some time to work through what the issues are, but I think the first question should be, what was the intent of the law, and not just why can't we, can we do it or can't we do it?
So you're seeing a definite change from a culture of no, or let's wait a number of years until we feel really, really safe. So people are definitely feeling it's something that needs to be done quicker than, say, the standard review process, especially imagine in terms of service, which are negotiated across different companies and different platforms for different situations.
Absolutely. I think the most important thing, though, is to just, we have to test this and try it in a few places, and when it works, it's easier to replicate. Hard to do across the board sometimes. This is the government, after all. And a mistake in the government actually can be a bigger problem. So you don't want to start with the problem and then say, well, we can fix that problem later. What we need to do is to show some successes and then replicate those successes across.
So with the SMS example, did you find that was easy to do because it wasn't necessarily requiring setting up a website? You could basically just say, here's a plan, we're going to reach...
Well, the SMS piece is a very interesting collaboration and partnership. A nonprofit runs it. What the government is doing is we are giving the platform in terms of the voice behind in the government, and then we've got DOD, HHS, and others providing access to their community. So the HHS, Health and Human Services, runs a lot of community hospitals. Mm-hmm. So we're running it through their military hospitals, or run through, and then the CDC is providing information to women who might have questions about what they need to do during their pregnancy. So our partnership is that we're giving it a platform in terms of voice, and we're also giving access to all of the agencies. And the platform is actually being run outside of government, but it's required time. It took us a year to build all those partnerships and to get the government to sign on to them, because you needed a memorandum of understanding amongst government agencies. And one thing that we always, and one thing that, rightly we get asked is, what are the unintentional consequences if something does go wrong, and what would the government get blamed for? So we have to always constantly work through each of those issues. But it's worked out really well. But again, it took a year, to be fair.
It seems like it should be something that's easy and replicatable when you're dealing with prenatal care and healthy people.
But it's great. There's 55,000, I think 55,000 women signed up now, and that's growing on a regular basis, which is great.
Yeah. And so the outreach would be probably through standard channels like public service messages.
Public service messages. We've got a lot of entertainers that are also promoting this throughout their, in their shows and things like that too. So we've got entertainers doing it. We've got public service messages. We've got media companies that are promoting this, and all of the health and human services clinics and hospitals are also joining in. So we're trying to get it out as much as possible. But again, I think what we don't do very well, to be fair, is get it out to those platforms that can get it out even further and faster. And what we need to do is we're trying to build all of those relationships now to get that out quickly, so it can multiply.
Well, I was going to say, because this should be a repeatable issue across any specific space. We have time for one more question. Does someone from the audience be so brave?
Hi. It's Keith Moore from Open Government TV. And I came in at the end, but the very last thing that you said about getting the message out or branding, transparency and collaborations is something that is probably a powerful solution to the public distrust with government. And so do you see from the White House and the agency level where there will be allocations for marketing and branding and promoting? Or is that a challenge at this point in time, given the budgets?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question, and it's certainly something that I think I've learned the importance of marketing and branding and promoting, just being in and trying to look at the various programs that are going on. I think it needs to be built into current budgets, and I think that's a training that's required a little bit of what that means. What does marketing, branding, and promoting mean? It's in a lot of budgets. So, for example, the Corporation for National and Community Service has a budget. When they do their public service announcements, they also have a separate marketing budget, and those just need to be used most effectively. And I think different agencies have different rules by which they do that, or what their allocations are, and how their budgets are done. So it is an important part, but I think we always have to think through when we think about the public dollar, which is the impact as great if we do the marketing or not, and that we need to get those measures put in place so we can make sure that we're not taking money away from one thing that's really important and then giving it to something that may not prove to be that important over the long term. But that's something I know a lot of agencies are looking at, and even an agency, a large agency, for example, like Housing, Health and Human Services, it's multiple agencies within one agency because there's so many different departments, so many different budgets, that each of them have their different budgets and how they think about it. And I think you all heard from Todd Park earlier today, where he's trying to bring some of these innovation ideas together across one agency, so they can have common platforms across the agency and not just in different parts of the agency. And similarly, that needs to be done in marketing and promotion and some of the other places too. We just need to think about how to do that effectively.
That's what's so fantastic. We're not just talking about innovation, technology, and collaboration with government to and with the citizens. It's also across all the agencies and then interagency.
Absolutely.
Because when you look at something like this multi-agency effort, how else are you going to reach out to these people and have everyone participate in a campaign and have it be successful otherwise?
Exactly. Well, innovation needs to take place within government as much as outside of government, so it's important.
Excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.